who was Margaret Thatcher's foreign policy advisor and who had a key role in drafting the Bruges speech that we saw a clip of there. Welcome to the Daily Politics. How important is location when giving these sorts of keynote speeches?
Well, it's important in a general sense. I think whether it's in the UK or whether it's abroad. It would be very hard for a Prime Minister, I think, to go abroad and offer concessions to Europe from abroad rather than at home, especially just ahead of a party conference in this country. So it does matter, and I find it a little hard to see how the present Prime Minister can make a speech of great substance about the Brexit negotiations abroad. She can say all the nice things, all the wonderful cooperation we shall have post-Brexit in security and anti-terrorism, climate change, and you name it. But to actually get to the nub of the hard issues under negotiation abroad, that for me would be pretty difficult.
And everybody will be poring over every word of this speech on Friday, bearing in mind the drama that we've had leading up to it. As we said, you helped write Margaret Thatcher's Bruges speech in 1988. She used the famous words European superstate, and that speech is often seen as an inspiration for Eurosceptics. Is that what you intended it to be?
No, first of all, they didn't need an inspiration. Eurosceptics existed long before Margaret Thatcher, let alone long before the Bruges speech. No, it was really the only attempt she ever made in all her years as Prime Minister to set out a coherent strategy for Britain in Europe and for the changes which were required in Europe to make the community more successful and less intrusive in the life of every nation.
Because she was a real European, you would say, then, at the time, even though it went down in history as a sort of a no to further European integration.
Well, it was also a declaration of faith in Europe, because remember she said, we don't dream of some cosy existence on the fringes of Europe. Our destiny lies in Europe.
I was a diplomatic correspondent at the time of the Bruges speech, and we all knew that this was a big speech. We saw it in the context of British politics, big speech, fighting. I don't think we were aware at the time of just how significant it was and its longevity. I don't get that feeling about Mrs May's speech.
You don't think it will have that sort of impact?
No, because I agree that I think she'll set out a direction of travel, but I still think it's too early. But it'll be the direction of travel. And the mood music is important, as you know, but I can't see the Florence speech being a Bruges speech.
Do you agree with that? Because, of course, as we know from history, the Bruges speech did lead to a split, or you say existed anyway, but a further split in the Conservative Party. And, of course, we had Geoffrey Howe's resignation a few years later. Do you agree with Tim that this won't have the same impact?
Yes, I certainly agree with that. I don't think it can possibly have the same impact. Though, of course, it could destabilise the government if the Prime Minister chose to go for broke and say the things she really wants to say, and I have no idea what they are, but if she says them, she might provoke one or two of her colleagues to jump and leave the government. So it could have a short-term political impact, there's no doubt about that. But I doubt it's going to. So I think my point is that I think the situation is ripe for that.
And when you say she could go for broke, what do you mean?
Well, set out either a hard Brexit, really hard Brexit case, in which case some of the Remainers, I think, would find it hard to stay in the cabinet, or she could go the other way and set out the Remain case, and some of the Brexiteers would jump. That was never going to be the case with the Bruges speech. This was an attempt to set out a whole new vision for Europe going forward, and it was almost philosophical in its way.
What do you make then of the cabinet machinations at the moment and what is happening in the build-up to this speech in Florence?
Well, quite clearly there are unresolved differences. I mean, I don't think that's a good thing, but they clearly exist. I have to say that I thought Boris Johnson's intervention was clearly a preemptive strike to get his side of the argument on the record, make it harder for the Prime Minister not to go along with a good part of that. It's not a very good way to run a government, I'm afraid, especially when the national interest is so much at stake as it is now. But it's a reflection of the mistake of holding the election, the even bigger mistake of not winning the election outright. We are where we are. And I doubt that we are ready yet to set out the definitive position that Britain will adopt as we go into the final phase of Brexit.
So you think that's been postponed, that's been delayed by this intervention, which in your mind didn't work?
Well, can't know if it'll work until we see what actually happens. And that's going to still take, after all, there's 48 hours still to go. And I've known many prime ministerial speeches which were not complete until an hour before they were
Very long time in
delivered.
politics.
It is a very long, well, it certainly is in the last few years, that's for sure. I mean, Margaret Thatcher always had a reputation for taking a tough line,
Yes.
and her tone was pretty no-nonsense. What kind of tone do you think Theresa May should adopt, bearing in mind, as you said, she's making this speech from an EU capital, sorry, not a capital, but a city like Florence?
I would expect it to be a conciliatory tone. I think it would be, as I said earlier, setting out the many advantages that even outside the EU we can bring to Europe. All the cooperation on the defence side, where we're stronger than anyone else, on the counter-terrorism, on many other areas of government policy. After all, it seems to me, actually, in a way, one reason for choosing Florence is it's a great reminder, given its history and the enormous culture, there's much more to Europe than the European Union.
And a beautiful place to go, of course.
Well, of course, no Prime Minister would ever go frivolous reasons like that.
No, of course not, but I'm sure they'll enjoy it. Thank you very much for coming.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.